Any regrets about what happened to child Q?
PC Wray was in a position of power when she and 2 other police officers strip searched a schoolgirl. Child Q was just 15 in 2020 when officers in Hackney, East London, told her she would be arrested if she didn't remove all her clothing, including her sanitary towel. She was searched for suspected cannabis, but none was found. A misconduct panel concluded the search was disproportionate and degrading.
What we've seen today is that the panel are very clear this should never have happened. We've had some very strong findings about the officers involved. And I think what this shows is the importance of raising concerns and complaining. Because had the child's mother not complained, this case would not have come to light.
Who are going through racism, sexism.
In 2022, protesters showed their support for child Q, who they believe was unfairly treated because of her race. She did not have an appropriate adult present for the search. The latest figures show that more than 450 children were strip searched in a year in England and Wales. Of those, almost half were conducted without an appropriate adult present, like a parent or guardian. And black children are 4 times more likely to be searched than others. The panel found race was not a factor, but described the search as a disastrous and negative interaction.
We are deeply sorry for what's happened here, and ultimately, not just to child Q, of course, first and foremost, but to her friends, her family and the community around her. This stop and search, to be clear, should never have happened, and certainly not in the way that it did. Sometimes we know that violence and drug-related crime will occur more in some communities than others, and ultimately stop and searches may be increased in certain areas where we know that that's required in order to keep the community safe from the threat of knife and drug-related crime. Sadly, we know sometimes that means we have a disproportionate number of people from certain communities.
The panel found the strip search was a significant error and humiliating for a 15-year-old child who will be affected by this for the rest of her life. Yes, in the last half an hour, PC Szmydynski and PC Linge have both been dismissed, and PC Wray has been given a final written warning. Now, this is just the latest case to erode trust in the police within communities. We did hear inside today, it was said that race was not a factor in this case, but nonetheless, it was described as a disastrous interaction between officers and this young woman, and it was said that they should have foreseen that the impact and the damage that would have on communities. In the last few moments, we've just been hearing from the solicitor representing child Q, and she has said that this should never happen again.
There can be no change without accountability, however. So while the family welcomes the panel's findings and the firing of 2 of the 3 officers, they also note that the Met have not taken the opportunity presented by this case to grapple with the structural issues of race which continue to undermine their standing with Londoners of all backgrounds.
Well, this evening, the government have told us that they will be introducing safeguards around the strip searching of children, and they say that this case once again raises significant concerns amongst communities.
We're joined now by former Met Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury. I think we can remember the uproar when this case was first revealed, Shabnam. So how do you feel about today's findings?
Oh, hi there, Charlene. Not surprised at all. There were a catalogue of catastrophic errors by the police officers concerned, those 2 that have been found guilty of the gross misconduct. So I'm not surprised at all of the outcome today.
Well, when we look at the list of things that came up during this, her hair was searched. Yes, they searched intimate parts of her body whilst she was on her period, whilst teachers stood outside of the room. Now, the Met acknowledges organisational failings. What does that even mean?
Well, it means that there's a serious lack of communication between the senior leadership and the training unit and the frontline officers, and that the officers have insufficient training. But look, let's be clear on one other thing here, Charlene. They breached the codes of practice for PACE, but what they also didn't do was it didn't apply common sense. Now, part of the codes also talk about hygiene and taking that into consideration when conducting a stop and search. So in this particular instance, when you've got a young, vulnerable child who is having her period, and then you've got 2 female officers who are also know what it's like for a young girl to be in that sort of a position, didn't apply any form of common sense. So it wasn't just failings of breaching their codes of practice and the training that they had, limited as it was a complete lack of applying any form of common sense or any form of compassion towards that child. And I can't imagine how she must have felt being overwhelmed by officers, school outside, teachers outside, and being, in a position where she frankly couldn't really have said no to what was actually going on there.
Now, there were accusations that the search was based on race. They're accused of racism, that racism was a factor within this. And the panel heard that black children were found to be considered older and less vulnerable than their white counterparts. Though in this occasion, they said race did not play a factor. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the issue with that, Charlene, is it's very, very difficult to prove unless the officers come out with some form of an admission. We know that young people, and particularly from the black community, are disproportionately subjected to stop and search in any case. And then trying to prove that this was the case in this instance is going to be very difficult unless you get clear admissions from the officers. And I can't think of any cases where there have been findings like that. Generally speaking, the outcomes are that there was no evidence or they couldn't prove that that was the case. So it's very few cases that are actually proven. I think there needs to be some more in-depth scrutiny around that with regards to how these misconduct processes actually look into the disproportionate targeting of young people from the black community or from diverse communities.
Well, Commander Kevin Southworth, when he was interviewed about this, he said that what happened to Child Q was a catalyst for change, both for the Met and for policing nationally. But for anybody that's not within any police force or has any connection whatsoever, the fact that this was allowed to happen in the first place is quite shocking. And, the fact that it required change, again, quite shocking. I mean, how are we in a situation where this can happen in the first place, not for the first time?
Well, it's not shocking to me, to be honest with you, with decades of policing and having seen what happens when it comes to people from the minority communities and how they are subjected disproportionately to stop and search. It's not shocking. What was shocking was that this did take place in school premises, and it's not something I'd ever experienced or was ever made aware of, and the manner in the way the child was actually treated. Now, the Met have actually said in those early stages that they did make some changes. They talked about having inspectors to supervise and to ensure that any kind of strip search was authorised, and that there's been a significant amount of work amongst the police and the black community. And I know that there have been lots of young people who are involved with the police that are actually giving their opinions. I'm hoping that the Met will listen, but I think they have a long, long, long way to go.
Now, one thing that they also said, and they were very keen to emphasise, was sadly we know there are children in London being exploited to carry drugs and weapons for others, as well as involved in criminality. So these types of searches have to remain within police powers. But I guess the issue regarding this search was that it was simply not done in the correct way and without a suitable adult present to witness what was happening.
Yeah, and I would emphasise that stop and search of young people must not stop, because at the end of the day, they are used by grown adults to carry drugs, to carry weapons, to carry cash, to carry firearms, all sorts of things, and they are exploited by those other people. They are subjected to being groomed as well. So it's important to ensure that stop and search is used effectively, that it's used ethically, that it's used professionally, and that when you are being stopped or you're dealing with a young person who you are stopping and searching, you're applying the law as it stands, and that you understand your legislation. And I think with that does come additional training. My recollection of officer safety training, for example, does not include refresher training for those young officers that come into policing. They get their very early stage stop and search training, pace requirements and so on. And then I don't think that is really covered very well as the years go on. And I think refresher training for all officers of all experience, whether they've got 5 years or whether they've got 10 years, is actually something that will help them. And I think working with communities, young people people so that when they're actually doing those stop and search, they can actually tell them how they feel, what it's like for them, and that their officers have a better way to be able to communicate and engage with them.
Okay, Shabnam Chowdhury, thanks very much.